The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are very pleased to welcome this week's guest, the Reverend Joseph G. Marina, S.J., who became the 29th president of the University of Scranton, succeeding Reverend Scott R. Pillars, S.J., who tragically lost his battle with ALS this past year. The announcement was made by the chairman of the university's Board of Trustees, James M. Slattery, who headed the search committee. And I'm quoting, "Father Marina brings to Scranton his unique experience as a teacher, pastor, scholar, and school administrator with more than 20 years of experience in higher education." Father Marina stated upon his acceptance as president, quoting, "I am humbled and honored to be chosen as the University of Scranton's next president. From day one, as a Jesuit, I have heard time and again how seriously Scranton takes its mission and identity." Prior to Scranton, Father Marina served as a provost and vice president of academic affairs for Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York. He was also elevated to acting president of Lemoyne. Father Marina holds a Doctor of Philosophy and Administration from Fordham University, a Master of Divinity and a Master of Theology from Boston College, a Master of Science in Secondary Education from St. John's University, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Physical Sciences, also from St. John's. We look forward to talking to him today about the unexpected and unbelievable experience of having to deal with 2 rounds of COVID-19, including the latest variant, Omicron, that has caused substantial change and upheaval on the campus. The new president coming in had a vision for Scranton, which we'll also talk about, but all of that has been kind of put on the back burner, as you would understand. The University of Scranton and Father Marina is committed to in-person learning and in-student classrooms, and to do that, obviously they've had to follow CDC guidelines and take exceptional steps. But the university is welcoming students back after the break for the spring semester. So we'll talk about that. We're going to also talk about some of his ideas on some of the secularism that is raging across academia in American universities, and his thoughts on that, and the role of a Jesuit Catholic university in higher education as we move forward into the 21st century.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Father Marina, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, Chuck.
Oh, my pleasure making time, and our audience for the TV show has heard about your tremendous resume. And of course, I'll follow right up with that and say that the Jesuits are at the top of the pyramid in terms of education, erudition, legendary, in fact, usually 12 years of doctorates and masters of theology and masters of science. So all the things in your case that our audience heard, they have heard from Father Pillars in the past, and of course Father Quinn, your predecessors at the University of Scranton. But you come to this area from a different area. You came from Lemoyne, of course, College in Syracuse, New York, where you were the provost and vice president of academic affairs, acting president for a term there as well. So when you were first contacted about possibly seeking the position as president of the University of Scranton, what were your first thoughts and how did you view the opportunity?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I should probably preface my answer by saying that whenever I talk about myself, I imagine St. Ignatius of Loyola in heaven cringing. Because
Touché.
Ignatius never wanted Jesuits to talk about themselves. He said the focus should always be on Christ.
I'll talk about it. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So anyway, I had heard about this opportunity at Scranton after nearly 25 years in college administration. Unlike Father Pillars and Father Quinn, I joined the Jesuits very late in life. I was 42 years old, which is almost unheard of. And prior to that, I had experience at 3 different universities in administration. So when I entered the Jesuits, I had already had all of that behind me, including my PhD.
Right.
So it almost seemed like a natural progression that that kind of experience and track record would continue. So after I finished my divinity training and was ordained, I spent 4 years in parish ministry and then went right back into higher ed. And that's how I landed at Lemoyne College.
Right.
Now, I think a lot of the people here, especially in Northeast Pennsylvania, realize that the search for a successor to Father Pillar's actually unfolded in grief.
Right. Of course.
He was diagnosed with ALS. He suffered terribly for more than a couple of years. And so when I entered the search process, through the encouragement of my provincial superiors, right, I knew that the campus community at Scranton was really going to have a hard time with this, because someone they had loved and admired and been following had been taken from them at too young an age.
Tragic. I've had the pleasure of, he was on the show, of course, and and dinner with him on a number of occasions, and also unique in the sense, Father, as you know, that he was one of the rare presidents that came back.
That's right.
So he'd already done an extended term.
That hardly ever happens. Yes.
Yeah, he had done an extended term and had substantially, expanded the footprint of the university, and did a lot of great things, and then came back with all this energy a second time, and then, of course, shortly thereafter he finds out he has ALS, and just tragic.
Yes, that's right. And I guess my first line of thinking was, he's going to be a tough act to follow. Not because he suffered so much, but because he had been such a great president. And yet, what I heard from the search committee and from everyone I talked with at Scranton and fellow Jesuits was, don't worry about following him. What we need right now is a pastor who's going to help us heal. And that's where you can bring your skills to bear. Right. So that was my first priority coming in, right, knowing that I was going to meet a grieving community and helping them to heal and to move forward.
Yeah. Well, you're clearly doing that, Father. When you came now to the university, before we get into what the reality you faced, which is we talked about off camera, like that old boxing axiom about everybody has a plan till they get hit. That's well, right. Then you get hit, and then you kind of have to make it up. So what were your initial thoughts coming to the university on, as you said, you were coming to a community in grief, and you were going to shepherd the university through that period, and then obviously with your extensive administrative skill set, you had plans for where you want to move the university going forward in the 21st century. So talk a little bit about that. What in a perfect world you'd already be well on your way to doing, but for COVID.
Well, just before the pandemic hit, the entire community at Scranton had moved through a process of strategic planning and had come up with a beautiful strategic plan based on 5 primary goals that they were eager to jump into and to get moving. Then, of course, the pandemic comes and disrupts everything in higher education, just as it has done in so many other realms of life. But the strategic plan was still there. I inherited it, and I received it as a gift. It was only a year old when I arrived at Scranton. So it wasn't really a matter of me coming in and saying, here's how Father Marina is going to implement all these new things. It was, how am I going to take this beautiful plan that the community put together that was really the result of the voices of every constituent on campus, and help to direct that in my own way. Right. It was a combination of the two. COVID, of course, is something that we have to deal with every single day. Right. As you mentioned earlier, we are on campus as we were last semester. We're coming back on campus.
Congratulations.
Next week. Next week the students will be back, and I can't wait for them to come back. I live in one of the residence halls. Right. I live in Pillar's Hall, named after Father Pillar's. Wow. And I have this entire building to myself for a month, and it's not something I enjoy. It's just way too quiet. I'm really looking forward to them returning. Of course, we can't let our guard down. No. So we have our protocols. We're actually even getting a bit stricter for the short term. We don't expect this to last, but we're going to be passing out N95 masks all next week. Right? And we're asking all of our students, our faculty and staff to also get the booster. Right. What we want to avoid is having to send everybody home again. Oh. I mean, that would be a tragedy. Yeah. And I don't think we're going to have to do that as long as we stick with the protocols, and hopefully this will lift soon.
Yeah, I think, again, back to what we talked about a little earlier. So you're engaged in, putting into place, implementing a strategic plan, and then boom, COVID hits, and then boom, Delta hits, and then you work your way without closing, kept school, students were in class, did a masterful job, and now you think you have a chance to take a break, and now Omicron hits over the holidays.
Yes.
And so now you're kind of back to square one again. You're like in the pits, so to speak. So yeah, it's been, like we said earlier, a challenge. I've got to, from the top administrative level as president that you face, to deal with all the things you've had to deal with, Father, or obviously it wasn't planned, and you've done a great job.
I got COVID myself. I had to deal with it.
Yeah, I got it over the holidays. Sure.
Yeah, as a breakthrough infection.
Yeah.
But this was back in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, I dealt with it till about New Year's. And,
okay. So we have that in common, Chuck.
We do. Yeah.
We're COVID brothers.
I'm 3 weeks out now, so my voice is still, I don't know if you could tell, it hasn't quite fully returned yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, I had good care. My wife was a godsend, and good doctor care. I was never behind it. I was never bedridden or any of that, but kind of like for about 6 or 7 days, like the flu. Mm-hmm. And now it's just a matter of getting everything back and my energy and all that. But no, I feel good. Thanks.
Good. And I'm optimistic because as long as there's not another variant coming, and please God, let there not be, Omicron seems like something we can manage.
Yes.
It
not as
seems
lethal.
to be moving through quickly.
Yeah.
There are some people who are getting very sick from that. We can't forget them.
No doubt.
But we're able to deal with this better than we were with Delta. That's for sure.
I think part of what I see coming around with COVID now is that there's at least more consistency in how they're handling it, and a little more reservation in saying, we don't know. And that's okay to tell people. They'll believe you if you tell them we don't know.
Yeah.
But don't tell them something that turns out to be true. That's a mistake.
Well, we've certainly learned a lot, right? And we've had to find our way through this pandemic. I feel bad for the hospitals and the medical workers because they have been so overburdened with all of this.
Yeah. I'm sure this was not, when you were getting the appointment to the University of Scranton's presidency, something you thought you were going to have to deal with to the level you were going to have to deal
with. Actually it was, because remember, we were already in this at Lemoyne before I came down.
Oh, okay, sure. It would have started by then.
It would have.
February of 2020.
And the protocols were very much the same.
Right.
So I was going from really, one room to another, not one world to another.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I learned something then. Well, we're coming up to our first break, believe it or not, Father. I told you the first half of the show would blow through. And as we've talked off camera, I want to turn our attention away from some of your administrative duties and obviously COVID and into, because concerns, I think, from what I read a lot, and the growing secularism in our country, the role that the Jesuits have always played through the centuries in being leaders in our faith. A time, I think, with the divisiveness and polarization in our country, we may need more than ever. And so there's some disturbing trends, and I'd like to get your take on it and the role you think that the Jesuits can play in that. And I think that'll be beneficial for our audience.
Excellent.
Again, we're here today with President Father Marina of the University of Scranton, a good man, highly educated, and in a great position to talk to us about some of the issues that we will confront in our faith and in a country that was founded on Judeo-Christian values. More and more of those values are being called into question with what's going on in our society. So when we come back after this break, we'll talk to Father about that.
Every week, Chuck Volpe shares his perspective on Pennsylvania issues in the news and on your mind. From new laws being introduced in Harrisburg and Washington, to government spending and even local controversies, hear how they affect us in Northeast and Central Pennsylvania. Catch Volpe's views every Tuesday on the Fox 56 News, first at 10.
Welcome back. Again, we are here today with the Reverend Joseph Marina, the 29th, I believe, president of the University of Scranton. And Fathers, we talked a little off camera, and as I kind of segued to our audience, a couple of just the things I'll throw out at you and get your comment. One we had talked about a while ago. First is, I was shocked to read that for the first time in its history, Harvard University, no less, appointed a chaplain who is an atheist. somewhat of a contradiction in terms for me, in terms of what I always viewed a chaplain to be. And then immediately, the Crimson, which is one of the most highly thought of student publications, of course, in the country, because it's from Harvard, completely endorsed it, that there should be a non-religious figure as chaplain, which is further supported by their freshman class, incoming class at Harvard, where for the first time more than half did not designate any religious affiliation whatsoever. So I gave you a lot there. That's a big topic, but pick out wherever you want and start.
Yeah, well, I think I'll start with your last point, Chuck. This growing reality of non-affiliation, at least with organized religions, right? Which is then bringing people to what seems now to be almost axiomatic claim that I am spiritual, not religious. Society is so much different now than when I was a kid, and certainly when my parents were. Life in the church in my parents' generation was everything, and it was central to the individual life and to the family life. And even beyond the church, there was kind of an ethic of joining things, of belonging to things. My father, in addition to being a devout Catholic, he was an elk. He belonged to the Eagles. He was in the Lions Club for a while. People don't really do that anymore. You don't hear of these groups. You might have a community on Instagram or on Facebook, but you're not out there joining all these different clubs. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. There's mistrust of institutions in general.
Correct.
There's the diminishment of the family, which used to encourage such things like religious vocations, right? And all of that is coming to bear. As a result of that, and we're seeing this also in Catholic colleges, there is a growing statistic of what's referred to as the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, right? That there's no religion. I'm checking none on the box. All right. What does that mean for us? Is that a tragedy? Yes, but it's not one that we can't work with because, as Jesuits like to say, it's not so important as to how the students come to us. It's more important what they are when they leave us. What effect has a Jesuit education had on students during their 4, 5, 6 years at a Jesuit university? And when they leave there, do they have a better, clearer, deeper sense of God, of the mystery of the divine? Can they articulate that? Can they espouse a genuine commitment to love of neighbor? Can they be ethical leaders, critical thinkers? Can they be committed to a just society? All of those things come to bear in a Jesuit education in a way that allows us to plant a flag and stake a claim and say, no matter how you come to us, we are going to embrace you and value you, but we're also going to ask you to embrace the tenets that we espouse. St. Ignatius, in the Spiritual Exercises, had a great way of putting it. He said, when you encounter someone who's not thinking like you do or isn't believing the same things that you do, go with them through their door and take them out through yours. So meet them where they are, but then share with them what really is at the heart of your faith, right? And pray for them and hope that they will find some sort of meaning in that. And that's what brings us to Harvard, I think, because I really shouldn't comment on this. I don't know enough about it. However, what I do know is that the chaplain, Mr. Epstein, was appointed. I'm not sure if his job is to be a pure chaplain, but to be an administrator of chaplains, like the president of the chaplains organization. So I really don't know if he does more work behind the scenes administratively.
Administrator.
It could be. I need to learn more about this. That said, if Harvard defines a chaplain the way that I do, well, I see a chaplain as a minister of faith, then there's a contradiction there. But if Harvard sees chaplaincy as a ministry toward meaning versus a ministry toward faith, and I really think they do, then I can understand, without celebrating, the hiring of an atheist, because both believers and non-believers, the Christians and the nuns, we're all looking for meaning in one way or another. Humanists find their way to meaning along a different path. Now, I'm prejudiced. I believe that finding meaning through a life of faith and through an encounter with the love of God is something that's as good as it gets.
Right.
But finally, I would say this to any of your viewers who are old enough to remember a movie that came out in the 70s called Oh God.
I do remember. George Burns.
And John Denver.
Yes.
Well, toward the very end, the movie ends in a courtroom.
I remember.
Where John Denver is being charged with disrupting society and all of this. And George Burns, as God, makes an appearance in the courtroom.
Yep.
And then he's just visible for a moment or two, and then he vanishes. But you hear his voice as he's leaving the courtroom, and he says this: "If you find it hard to believe in me, perhaps it will help you to know that I believe in you."
Yeah. Wonderful.
And I think that's the answer. That we know how much God loves us.
Right.
If we just allow ourselves to experience that love, then the faith will grow from there.
Well, let me corroborate a lot of what you just said from personal experience, the best kind. I was a young 14-year-old freshman, started at Scranton Prep in high school. My first year I was at Prep. I went to Bishop Hannon later and graduated from Bishop Hannon. But my first year I was at Scranton Prep. And the first Jesuit I got to meet was a gentleman named Father Bourbon, my Latin teacher. And about 2 weeks in, maybe even 3 weeks in, he came over and he said, "Mr. Volpe." I said, "Yes, Father." He said, "What's your plans for later in the week?" I said, "I don't know what you mean." He said, "Well, I'll be coming up to dinner to your home." So he said, "Wednesday or Thursday works for me. Why don't you talk to your mom and your dad and we'll pick a day." Well, of course, I was a nervous wreck, oh my God. So I went home, told my mom, and of course, my father had graduated from Scranton Prep in 1954, so he was used to all this. He said, "Oh, great." But him coming to a dinner table and spending 2.5 or 3 pleasant hours and taking this little bit of a shy and, gawky freshman that I was, like most are, and the fact that he had showed that interest in me, to your point about going through doors and coming, making the extra step, taking the extra effort to get to know me, my family, and that guiding, like just wisdom and knowledge. One of the first things, and he said it in Latin, but divide and conquer. He said, when you become overwhelmed with all of this, if you look, it's a panacea of problems. Isolate them and deal with them, one at a time. And it was advice like that, honestly, that helped me through difficult times. So I've said in this show many times, Father, and before you, that the Jesuits will always have a special place for me. When there was a time I would question my faith, it was the Jesuits that acknowledged some of the shortcomings in our faith. And as like you very presciently said, went through my door, but went out through another one. So some of the things you're talking about, I hate to use the word proactive, because that sounds aggressive, but there's almost a proactive sense that I always felt from the Jesuits. They weren't content to leave you alone. They were going to prod and push and bring out whatever that quality was in you that made you you. So what you're saying in your examples that were wonderful, I can testify to in my own life and from personal experience that would I be probably, I don't go to church every week. I don't. And not something I'm proud of, but I should.
I am available for confessions after the show.
Please, thank you. We'll have a few. I got a list I built up. But I feel close to my faith, and I take comfort in the fact that there are Jesuits like you and others doing the Lord's work at our universities, because as we've talked about, Father, a few other things that we had mentioned, and I'll just get your thought on. For the first time in this country, that we have passed a tipping point where more than 50% of American citizens do not identify with any religious affiliation. So we now have a majority that aren't part of what I'll consider organized religion. Another little, I shouldn't say a little, but a part of that problem is you also kind of touched on, when you grew up and I grew up, the family unit was different. It was more of a family unit. You had a significant percentage, high percentage, of having a mother and a father. Sometimes both worked, of course, and all that. Well, another tipping point we hit, I just read in a David Brooks New York Times editorial, that for the first time also, according to a Gallup poll, we have now children in the majority in a single-parent household, in the majority, which makes it hard because now obviously the one parent has to work. You have the turnkey kids, they call them, they come home from school. A lack of like purpose, organization, structure, and then filling the void, unfortunately, is social media, which isn't always a good thing. Mm-hmm. So just some of your thoughts on that.
There are plenty of things in society that can satisfy us, but almost all of them satisfy us temporarily. And you can go through the whole list. You can put social media on the list. You can talk about money or status or power, you name it. It satisfies for a very brief period. Again, another metaphor of St. Ignatius was what he called the rock and the sponge. Water drips onto a sponge. It doesn't make a big show. It doesn't splash. You don't hear it, but it penetrates and it stays there. It hits the rock and there's a big show. It splashes. You hear it.
It's gone.
And it's gone. It doesn't enter into the heart. When you talk about people like Father Gannon, and I have to say, since my time at Scranton, when it comes to hearing about past Jesuits, not the ones who are there currently, who are wonderful, but when I hear anybody talk about a Jesuit who was there in the past, with the exception of Father Pilar's, Father Gannon's name comes up each and every time. I mean, this man must have had a tremendous effect.
Yes.
And it's that personal effect that can also bring people to God, right? I mean, if we take it out of the realm of the institution for a moment and just ponder the kinds of wonderful encounters that it sounds like you had with Father Gannon, with other Jesuits, perhaps with lay professors on campus. All of those things had the potential of bringing you closer to God.
It did.
This is a principle of Ignatian spirituality. Right. In fact, it's part of the principle and foundation that all things have within them the potential of leading to a deeper relationship with God. And so I'm really consoled to hear that you had that experience, but now multiply that by thousands of others who were there as well, who at some point in their lives, even if it's not during those 4 years, may think back and say, God was there in the moment and I didn't realize it, right. But I'm realizing it now. And it may be a little late, but it's not too late. If you go back and search the earliest documents of the founding of the Society of Jesus, St. Ignatius says there is a singular purpose for the creation of this Jesuit order, and that is to aid souls. That puts it in 3 words, to aid souls, to help as many people as possible. And whether that's through education, parish ministry, retreats, being on the borders, and the boundaries, helping migrants and refugees, all of the things that we do that are edgy. Father Greg Boyle with Homeboy Ministries out in Los Angeles, all of it works together for the glory of God and to help grace unfold in the world.
Well, you're the personification of that, Father. I wish
hardly.
You are, and you follow in a long line and great tradition at the University of Scranton. As a proud alum of the University of Scranton, I know our university is in good care with you. Thank you, Father.
God bless
you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Again, we were here today with Reverend Joseph Marina, S.J., the latest and 29th president of the University of Scranton. And hopefully you found some of our discussions away from politics beneficial, and I know I enjoyed it. Thank you, Father. We'll be back next week.